The following program is a Town of Colonie television production of the William K. Sanford Town Library.
Hi, welcome to the latest edition of Mental Health Now. I'm your host, Matthew Shapiro from the National Alliance of Mental Illness, New York State. Before we get into today's topic, I want to make a couple of quick announcements. Number one, we're actually coming to it during an historic week for mental health advocates, as on December 7th, the Senate passed the 21st Century Cures Act, which is a major legislation addressing a lot of health issues, but mainly, for our concern, mental health issues, things that we've been advocating for a long time. If our viewers remember the episode we had with Representative Tonko, we discussed a lot of the issues that were in the House mental health reform bill, which actually never got introduced to the Senate, but a lot of these issues did get rolled into the Senate bill. And some of the things we're very excited about is the formation of an Assistant Secretary for Mental Health and Substance Youth, authorization grants for crisis intervention team programs and de-escalating trainings for law enforcement and first responders, clarifying the federal Medicaid statute permits same-day billing for the provision of mental health and primary care services, requiring new federal guidance on compliance with mental health and substance abuse parity requirements, which Representative Tonko spoke about so passionately, and investments in coordinated specialty care for early intervention services, and investment in sort of community treatment teams. If our viewers remember our episode with Dr. Sullivan, Commissioner of OMH, we discussed that in length too. So a lot to be excited about, and the President is expected to sign that bill, which we're very happy about, and a lot of our viewers really voice their advocacy on these issues, and we really appreciate it. Speaking of appreciation, this is actually our last show of the year, and this has been our first year of doing Mental Health Now, and I just want to be sure to thank the Town of Colonie and the William K. Sanford Library to give us this opportunity to speak directly to you about so many issues and raise awareness, and to Greg Rosinski, who does such a great job, not on this show, but all the fine programming you see here on Colonie TV. So look forward to another exciting year. So on today's episode, we're going to be discussing a topic that is so important this time of year and often gets overlooked, and that's mental health during the holiday season. You know, for most people, the holiday season is a time of joy and celebration, but for many, it's a very challenging time. And with me today to discuss these issues is Heather Lewis, who is the program manager of the Haven program, which provides grief counseling through the Jewish Family Services of Northeastern New York, located right here in Albany. So hi, Heather, welcome. Thank you for joining us today.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Of course. So, as I said, a lot of people tend to overlook that the holidays can present a lot of challenges to people's mental health. Can you discuss some of this?
I think many of us know the holidays present a challenging time for many people for a lot of different reasons. Certainly people who have experienced grief and loss, certainly within, say, the last year, can really have a hard time. I know I've seen Facebook posts and things lately, people talking about, oh, it's time to get the decorations out and start that shopping list, but I'm just having a tough time because it may be the first time you're celebrating without a loved one who had passed, and it hits really hard this time of year. Again, besides grief issues, though, this holiday season can be really hard for, say, people who don't celebrate Christmas, because, the celebrations, the Santas, the bell ringing, all the Christmas is really, really pervasive and everywhere. So that can be hard if you're not part of the majority, so to speak. And that looks is very broad as well. There's, people of different faiths, people who don't practice a faith. So that can be hard. People who also maybe, I think there's this keeping up with the Joneses
Yeah.
thing, in terms of buying the most, buying the best. Well, that person got this for their kid. I need to, outdo that gift. And it's hard for people who maybe don't have close family, maybe nearby, or really much of a strong family unit at all. And that can be hard when, again, the media and everything pushes this, family togetherness, happy, jolly time. And for someone who's maybe struggling with that, that can be, an added kind of like punch to the gut of emphasizing, wow, I'm having a hard time. And in general, again, stress with finances, keeping up with the Joneses, but even this time of year, here in the Northeast, we get cold, nasty weather, and the whether you want to call it a disorder or not, the seasonal affective distress, if you will.
No, certainly.
Lack of sunlight, the cold.
Right. So
all makes it hard.
And you touch on a lot of things I want to dig a little deeper in.
Yeah.
The first is grief, because that is so hard. This is, like you said, a time for family and a time for reflection. And if you don't have your loved ones with you, it's very tough. My wife lost her mom very suddenly a few years ago, and that first round of holidays was so difficult, and we tried to do the same traditions we would do with her mom, but of course it's not the same. So what are some ways people can do, or some advice you give for people who are grieving this time of year?
I think you hit on a couple key pieces, is to really acknowledge the reality of that. It is different now. I think pretending it's not. Yes, and on the one hand, you want to try as best you can to try to continue some of those key traditions that really meant something to you. But I think that's the important piece. Again, not to make it about trying to do for everyone else, but do what makes sense for you and what you find meaning in. And again, I think in general, it comes back to just basic self-care. Just taking care of yourself and what your needs are. If you're, feeling emotionally really vulnerable and really struggling, and you feel like, oh, I'm supposed to go to that office holiday party, and you're not feeling it, don't go. You gotta take care of yourself. And what you need, in the moment, and what makes the most sense. And again, basic self-care, when someone's going through really, really serious and more like immediate grief, things like just getting out of bed, showering, just going through the day-to-day routine of, did I eat 3 meals today? Basic things like that can be, putting one foot in front of the other. And ultimately, stay in touch with people. I think when people are struggling with grief, symptoms of depression in general, we'd want to stay in bed under the covers and hide from the world. But if you can push yourself even just a little bit to connect, even over the phone, with just one person, just stay connected to the world and the here and now.
Something we say a lot at NAMI, too, is that we have a kind of a catchphrase. It's a hashtag type thing, is I will listen, and the power of I will listen. And it kind of starts an interesting story of there was a big businessman who in New York City, whose brother called him one day, and he was in me. He couldn't take the call. Brother later that day ended up taking his own life, and he was always haunted by the fact, how could have things been different if I had taken that call? If I had simply listened, could things have been different? Now we'll never know. When you're dealing with someone in that state of depression. But I think, people forget, especially this time of year, when we need friends to talk to, and people will listen, and that's so important about being a friend. And I think people are reluctant to talk about some of these issues. They fear, they don't want to bring anyone else down during the holidays. They don't want to ruin anybody's season. But if you need help, and that's what friends are for, and that's what family is for, I think it's so important. You touched on something else we talk about a lot at NAMI, and that's your self-care. And the metaphor we like to use is the airplane one. When they're giving you the safety instructions, they tell you have to put the oxygen mask on yourself first before you can take care of somebody else. And that's certainly true in mental health and self-wellness. And don't feel obligated like you need to do things. In fact, we just had a bit of some sad news in our office today. One of our members' families, there was a suicide in the family, and there was a party we got invited to tonight, and some of the people on the staff were very upset. They were close with the person, didn't want to attend the party, and I said, that's okay.
Right,
if you don't feel like celebrating, you don't have to celebrate. But, it's a double-edged sword, because you do want to be with people, you do want support, but you have to do what's right for you. And I think it's funny being with Jewish Family Services. I think Jewish people deal with grief in a very interesting way and very differently in some ways. One of my favorite sayings is, may their memory be a blessing. And I would tell this to my wife after her mom passed, because I lost my father when I was 17, right before the Jewish holidays, so at the end of the summer, and it was very immediate, it was very tough. We would always go to synagogue together, and you'd say, well, may their memory be a blessing. And it gets to the point when you talk about someone in the beginning, it's very hard, it can be sad, but as time goes by, when you talk about that person, it brings joy and brings you happiness, and it is a blessing to you. And and I think with the way Jews do it too, is naming children after people who came before them. I'm named after my great-grandfather, and I never knew him, of course, but I was named after him, but through the stories and then the blessings of the memories, I feel like I do know him. So it's something that you should talk about, people who are gone, especially this time of year when you miss them the most. One of the other things you talked about that's so important, because people put so much unneeded stress on themselves this year, whether it's, like you say, shopping, keeping up with the Joneses, trying to get the perfect gift, especially if you're shopping for somebody who has everything. You never know what to get people. What would you say to people who are put all this added stress on yourself? They need to decorate the house and go all out and trying to one up the neighbors. All these things you hear about this time of year. It can be a very competitive time of year.
Yeah. I think, again, if the holidays is something that you actively engage in and is important to you, it's great for us all to try to remember what the holidays are, the core meaning there, and especially if we tie in the topic of grief. Again, what is the holiday season supposed to be about? Spending time with loved ones, appreciating what you do have, taking time for reflection and looking back at the past year and looking ahead to the year ahead. So I guess, and again, and ultimately, Christmas there is a religious holiday under it, underneath all the commercial stuff we get caught up in. And again, that's another lesson with grief too, that your faith can be a good source of strength for some people. So that's certainly an area to turn to and maybe to turn back to sometimes. Sometimes people have maybe kind of fallen away or getting kind of casual with it, but that can be a source of strength and help for people and a source of community, as well.
Yeah. And there are so many things that you can do to obviously combat stress. And here at NAMI, we do have family support groups. We do have support groups for individuals living with a mental illness, and we'll discuss some of the services that JFS has, Jewish Family Services, and maybe that's a good bridge for right now. Can you kind of explain what Jewish Family Services is? I think the name doesn't really kind of explains it, but not really. So can you give us some insight on that?
Yeah, we are a nonprofit and a voluntary organization, but non-sectarian. So we have Jewish Family Services is our name, but we're not a religious organization. We just basically carry our services through with a Jewish values of really being of and for the community and empowering individuals and families to really help them to find the resources and solutions, within themselves.
Right. And you run, so you're like we said, the program manager for the Haven program, which deals with grief counseling. So can you talk a little bit about that? And if someone, is struggling with grief issues right now, how would they be able to reach out to you, and what type of services are available?
Well, the Haven program originated in Schenectady many years ago. But in the last couple years, JFS has brought the program into our fold. And we are continuing the work of Haven through JFS. Many of our callers and supporters are still very much home base is Schenectady, and we serve that community well. But again, our services are open to, all or no faith.
Right.
And you basically, if you have an issue that you're struggling with in terms of a loss or even like a significant like life transition issue, say you lost a job and that's a loss that you're grieving. We don't put these things in a box in a category like, well, has it been so long and how close were you to the person? We don't necessarily there's no test for it. Basically, if you're struggling with a loss and grieving, give us a call and we can explore what that looks like for you.
And what number can people call if they're struggling with these type of issues, Heather?
Of course.
Is the one on the card here?
No, it's actually 518, obviously. We're in the capital region. You would ask me that. 370-1666 is the direct number for Haven services. And again, the Haven program is within Jewish Family Services. And Jewish Family Services has been around for like over 150 years. And really we've grown and changed with the community as the needs of the community changed as well. Originally started serving immigrants, new to this country, and now we work with families dealing with all kinds of situations that are maybe a little bit more current.
Right.
So.
And we'll flash the graphic for the website so people can contact Jewish Family Services at jfsneny.org. Greg will get that on there.
Yeah.
And that's a good way to learn more about what's going on. And it's interesting when you talked about grief and not putting it in a box, because I think most people associate grief with loss. But something we talk about with NAMI and families that are dealing with loved ones with serious mental health issues is grieving. I don't want to say disappointment, but I think whenever someone has a child, you have certain expectations for them. And when things like serious mental illness or other issues come into play, whether it's developmental disabilities or autism, things like that, and you realize, well, my kid is not going to be able to do what you would hope they would be able to do, or, things like all these things that we come to expect. That's, again, a type of grief, and one that is certainly magnified during this time of the year. Another community that I know JFS serves so well is the senior citizen population with the NORC program. And of course, it's a very difficult time of year for senior citizens. A lot of times they're surrounded by loss, sometimes separated from their families. Maybe they're not living in their home anymore. For some seniors who might be worried, or if you're a loved one of a senior and that you're worried about their mental health this time of the year, what some advice can we give to that or talk to about that population?
Again, I think seniors, or really anyone you care about, I think, checking in on people and checking in to see about their own self-care, seeing how they're doing. I think, another area that people struggle with, people who also have mental illness and then experience a loss, that can be kind of compounded and scary.
Sure.
Because I think the symptoms or experiences, if you will, of grief can be very similar to, say, a depressive episode.
Sure.
And someone who's gone through that might be like feeling, wait, no, I need to pull myself out of this. I need to not get sucked into the staying in bed all day and crying. But if you just lost a loved one, that's perfectly expected and reasonable. So I think ultimately the lesson, just give yourself a break, and just, let the emotions flow and it's okay. You'll get through this too, and reach out to others for support.
Right, and that's so important. It's interesting with Jewish Family Services too. I think most people, if they're having a mental health crisis or grief or stress or all these things we've been talking about, not just during this time of the year, but throughout the year, you think you need to see a psychiatrist. And we talk about this all the time. There's such a shortage of psychiatrists, both in New York State and throughout the country. It's one of the things that the 21st Century Cures Act is looking to address, is give incentives for psychiatrists and psychologists. But in fact, you don't need to see a psychiatrist. I mean, obviously, if you have a severe, more mental illness type thing, a psychiatrist is appropriate if you need medication. But if you're just dealing with grief issues or stress or these issues that we're talking about, you can see a social worker like yourself, a nurse practitioner. I mean, so again, those type of are the services JFS offers, correct?
Yeah, as well as other, nonprofit human services agencies. Oftentimes it's it's great that someone maybe sees their doctor, again, to cover the medical end of things and help with medication needs if necessary. I work with a number of people who see a doctor or a prescriber for medications, and then I, as the counselor, stay in touch with that physician to keep track of, how are they doing, any kind of changes, to keep track of, maybe there's an uptick in symptoms and maybe we need to raise the dose a little or change some things. But again, the counseling part is where you can really work out some of the stress and the emotions and, the family dynamics and other stressors that are going on. We have at JFS, we have social workers and also mental health counselors available, who, as well as nurse practitioners and all wonderful people who, can help. You can really sit down and sort through some of those issues you might be struggling with.
Right, and for JFS is located in downtown Albany on Madison Avenue, but you do visits all over, right? It's
I wear a few hats, I guess. So some of what I do is I actually work with seniors in their homes on occasion, who I do some counseling as well as kind of some case management, help them with some medical kind of juggling appointments and kind of understanding what's going on, in the end of life issues. Again, we still are working with the folks in Schenectady who have that connection to Haven, and we meet with people in the First United Methodist Church over on State Street in Schenectady by appointment, and we can certainly meet. We want to be as flexible as we can to try to meet people where they're at. Ultimately, that's kind of the core of really human services work in general.
And that's an exciting, because that's kind of in a lot of ways mental health services and psychiatric services. Something anyone who's watched the show, you've heard us talk about this a lot, which is the On Track New York program. When we did the intro about the 21st Century Cares Act, we talked about coordinated specialty care. And this is a little bit like what Heather is talking about, meeting people where they are. I think it's so important. When we talk about the stigma and, as we're talking about like people searching for a psychiatrist, I think that's that adds to it. People find they're so stressed it's hard to find a psychiatrist. They have to go. It's hard to get an appointment. Well, things like what we're talking about here is meeting people where they are. I think someone who goes to a church is more comfortable walking into a church. It doesn't say psychiatric. There's not maybe that stigma associated with it. And of course, On Track, because it focuses more with young adults, will meet people in like Starbucks, coffee shops, diners. So it makes that the first step's always the hardest. So that makes it easier and so important. And again, obviously, talking about the church, the services that you provide doesn't push Judaism or any other religion on you. It's basic mental health services. It's just a Jewish organization doing it, correct?
Right. Honestly, every individual is unique, has their own needs and their own strengths and their own background. And if a particular faith or house of worship is something that speaks to you and would be of benefit and a strength for you, that's great. I also tend to promote cats as a wonderful resource, and that has nothing to do with religion, but really, whatever it is that speaks to you and maybe brings you comfort or, again, can kind of help you move forward. I think generally, in grief, there's kind of the idea of, moving on versus moving forward. When we've lost a loved one, we think, well, how can I keep going? Sometimes people experience guilt over that, and you're still here.
Right.
The idea is to try to, and what grief counseling can do is help you express your sorrow, work through those feelings and feel them because they're real, and share those memories because those are important and vital to hang on to, and carry that all with you going forward and find a way to do that.
So I think that's great advice for anyone struggling with grief and all these different issues. You said cats. So I think we're going to have an episode on pet therapy. It's such a big animal therapy. I can be like Jack Hanna here and have dogs. But it's interesting. Even at Albany Airport, it was funny. We were flying out early in the morning, and a woman comes around and said service dog. It was such a cute dog. I wanted to pet the dog. I said, oh, you probably can't pet it. And she's like, no, they're here they're animal ambassadors.
Oh, that's awesome.
They're here to relax people when they're traveling. It's such a stressful time. And it does. It makes such a difference just petting an animal, and we're big proponents of animal therapy. So that's great advice for grief. I think I want to try to give some advice for people who are tackling the stress right now of the holidays. And again, I think the most important thing is obviously, like we said before, self-maintenance and self-care and setting limits for yourself. You can only do so much. And I think things like budgeting probably is helpful in sticking to that budget. And you talk a little bit about that.
Well, I mean, that's a great concept, and it's you can expand that too, right? But we set a budget for maybe the family finances, and we'll only spend so much for each person or that kind of a thing, but then think about that in terms of maybe like the time and effort you put into things, and
That's true.
you know, I think you can expand that concept to really the rest of the whole holiday stress in general. Again, you put limits on yourself and how much you're willing to put out there and how much stress you're willing to take on.
Right, exactly. And it's supposed to be joyful, and it shouldn't be stress. And knowing too your limits of, like you said before, if it's something, if you feel pain putting up the Christmas tree, you don't have to do it. And I want to touch on one thing I think is so important too that you kind of touched on. I go, growing up Jewish, I always have what I call Christmas tree envy. I always wanted a Christmas tree. I'd go to all my friends' houses and they would have a Christmas tree, and you would want that. So, for people who may not celebrate Christmas or Hanukkah or Kwanzaa, the holidays right now, I always want. I mean, right now is such a difficult time for Muslim community as a whole. Not just this time of year, but I can't even imagine. So any advice you would give people who feel overwhelmed, maybe not be celebrating the holidays, but overwhelmed by everything? How do you digest that and handle it?
I guess just get through every day and just try to find whatever has meaning for you. We don't have to subscribe to the majority religion or again commercial emphasis out there. I think it's just again finding what means something to you and your family. And I guess maybe finding ways to celebrate. I mean, ultimately, it's the end of the year.
Right.
I mean, we can look at it that way.
And it's always at the end of the year, it's a good time for reflection, self-reflection, things you're proud of from the past year, things you want to do better. And, how can we make the year ahead better than the year that was? And I think that's very important. And everyone can do that, of course. And we're actually running out of time. So I want to thank you for, all the things that you're doing, all the help that you provide. I think, this is useful information for everybody, not to put too much stress. It should be a joyous time of year for everyone. And I just want to conclude with wishing everyone, a joyous holiday season, a joyous time of year, and the year ahead should be happy, healthy, and peaceful for you. And of course, you help make that. You control your own destiny in some ways. And if you're feeling overwhelmed, it's okay to feel, to express those feelings, whether to friends, family, or coworkers. So that's what we encourage. And here at NAMI or at JFS, if you come with us with those concerns, we will listen. So thank you very much. Again, happy holidays, happy healthy New Year, and we'll see you next time on Mental Health Now.